This video is sponsored by Miller Note. In 1937, the Nazis held an exhibition of 650 modern artworks that they had stolen from museums and private collectors. It was part of the Nazis' culture wars, designed to inflame the public, and it was called the Degenerate Art Exhibition. Artists considered degenerate by the Nazis included Klee, Otto, Pablo Picasso, Marc Chagall, and Piet Mondrian, as well as Egon Schiele and Oskar Kokoschka. But surprisingly, one artist was missing: Gustav Klimt, who at one time or another had been described as morally questionable, obscene, or even pornographic, and was friends with Jewish patrons, intellectuals, and artists. So why did the Nazis leave him out of their modern art purge? In an earlier video, I looked at Gustav Klimt's masterpiece, The Kiss. Now, for Great Art Cities, we look at 3 lesser-known works by Klimt in 3 lesser-known cultural destinations in Vienna. And we also look at why some of those works suited Nazi ideology. For over 6 centuries, the Habsburg dynasty controlled vast swathes of Europe. At the heart of their dominion was its capital, Vienna, a focal point of culture and politics that would leave a lasting mark on the world stage. It was in Vienna that much of what we think of as modern emerged. The Burg Theatre opened in 1748 and became an instant symbol of Habsburg success, showcasing the world's finest theatre and opera performances. 3 Mozart operas premiered there, as did Beethoven's First Symphony and several works by both Strauss and Brahms. It would be the setting for Gustav Klimt's artistic breakthrough. At the age of just 22, Klimt, along with his brother Ernst and their friend Franz Mach, received the most prestigious commission in Vienna, direct from the Emperor Franz Joseph himself, to create the decorative ceiling panels you can see today, above 2 grand staircases. They created 10 monumental paintings for the theatre, 1 in each of the tympana or arch over the state staircases, and 5 in each of the 2 wings, created directly onto the surface of the walls of the Burg Theatre. The level of detail is extraordinary, and the panels here show the evolution of the theatre, starting with the altar of Dionysus, featuring the nudity that Klimt would be known for later in his career. But here, it is a much more restrained classical nudity. The Cart of Thespis shows the world's very first actor travelling with a cart that doubled up as a stage. His face is heavily plastered with makeup to resemble a mask. From antiquity, Klimt takes us to the golden age of the theatre in Elizabethan England. In Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, we witness the suicide scene in Romeo and Juliet. The research is impressive as we see the nobility, including the Virgin Queen herself, sitting on the actual stage, exactly how it was in Shakespeare's time. He also shows the crowded pit for the ordinary folk, where we find these 3. They are Klimt, his brother, and Mach. This is the only self-portrait Klimt ever did, included here as a cheeky ad for his budding business. One of the most spectacular and largest murals by Klimt is the Theatre at Taormina, a panoramic view of the Greek theatre in Taormina, Sicily, as seen from above. Klimt travelled to Sicily in 1889 and had visited the theatre. We see here his early adoption of decorative patterns and vivid colours. A century after he did them, Klimt's preliminary drawings for the ceiling paintings were discovered in the theatre's attic, showing what a consummate draftsman he was, and they can now be seen at the Albertina Museum. Emperor Franz Joseph was so thrilled with the theatre works that he awarded Klimt and his partners the Golden Cross of Merit, after which they were inundated with commissions. In 1894, following their Burg Theatre triumph, Klimt and Mach were commissioned to paint 5 enormous works for the ceiling of the university. The centerpiece was to be created by Marc, and the others depicted the four faculties: theology, jurisprudence, medicine, and philosophy. 3 of those were to be created by Klimt. Over the 10 years he worked on the project, Klimt's style underwent dramatic changes as he moved towards a more personal vision. In 1897, he led a group of 19 avant-garde artists that broke away from the conservative academy to form a new radical movement, the Vienna Secession. They were heavily influenced by the Symbolists, an international artistic movement of the late 19th century, who turned away from realism and towards mystical ideas, dreams, philosophy, and psychology, leaning towards the erotic and sexually charged. It was the dawn of modernism, and Klimt and his colleagues were inspired by the unconscious mind and were challenging accepted attitudes and ideas. An extraordinary exhibition hall was built for the artists of the secession movement, a place to show their art and have temporary exhibitions. Today, it is home to the Beethoven Frieze, Gustav Klimt's 34-meter-long homage to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, as interpreted by Richard Wagner. Hitler's favourite piece of music, often played at Nazi rallies, interpreted by his favourite composer. The Nazis interpreted the Beethoven Frieze as fitting in with their philosophy. Klimt's frieze celebrates the triumph of idealism over materialism, an idea often found in Nazi aesthetics, and they saw the knight in shining armour at the centre of the frieze as a proto-Führer figure, a battle-ready hero in the spirit of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, against hostile forces. The university that commissioned Klimt happened to be the same one that later rejected a young artist, twice, Adolf Hitler, a decision that could have changed the course of world history. Vienna is one of the greatest art cities in the world. Apart from the Klimt connection, the university has a world-class collection with works by Rembrandt, Titian, Rubens, Dürer, De Hoogh, and Van Dyck, as well as one of the greatest works by Hieronymus Bosch. The scandal surrounding the commission for the university would put an end to Klimt's successful career as a muralist. The original proposal for the theme of the paintings was the victory of light over darkness, something like this. But instead, Klimt delivered this. By this point, Klimt was heavily influenced by the Symbolists and Nietzsche. And although his 3 university paintings stuck loosely to their faculty subjects, the work delivered had a deep vein of pessimism and were uncompromisingly avant-garde. The images we are showing here are black and white photos of the originals, which were destroyed 40 years after. More on that later. While Marc produced works in the classical style the university wanted and expected, Klimt's ideas were much more radical. They really are some of the most extraordinary paintings ever produced, but it is understandable why the university rejected them. The first painting he completed, Philosophy, is intense. On the right is a shadowy, all-knowing sphinx, while the left side of the painting is a cascade of nudes of all ages and all stages of life, ranging from children at the top to a decrepit old man at the bottom. The enigmatic and allegorical image of philosophy faced immediate criticism. The figures are drifting and aimless, and the painting suggests that the progress of history was in the hands of fate, which clashed with the academics' idea of themselves as purely rational beings. In medicine, there are even more nudes, including a prominent female figure with a newborn baby at her feet, who is breaking away from the endless cycle of being born, growing old, getting sick, eventually dying, while only to be reborn. It is a deeply pessimistic painting, and Hygeia, the Greek goddess of health, cleanliness and hygiene, pictured holding a snake, turns her back on humanity. It is not a celebration of medicine, or even the science of healing. Jurisprudence is just as gloomy, depicting a court scene with an old naked man intertwined with an octopus, being judged by 3 avenging goddesses, justice, law, and truth, also naked, who hold humans to account for their crimes. Behind them are several decapitated heads. It is an image that sees the law as vengeful and focusing on punishment, which is not what the academics wanted in their lecture hall. Many of the decorative elements we will see in later paintings by Klimt are to be found here. None of the paintings were ever hung, as they were rejected by the university because of the artist's disturbing depictions of nudity, human sexuality, and despair. In 1904, a frustrated Klimt terminated his contract with the university and paid back his fee. It was Klimt's devoted patron, August Lederer, a Jewish factory owner, who came to his rescue by purchasing all 3 massive canvases Klimt had completed. In his Vienna residence, Lederer had a designated room for Renaissance masterpieces and another solely dedicated to Klimt's artworks. In 1938, the Nazis started seizing Jewish-owned possessions, and the Lederer art collection was one of the first to be stolen. Hitler famously hated all modern art, and in addition to having the 1937 Degenerate Art Exhibition, the Nazis burnt many masterpieces on huge bonfires, but Klimt, one of the most provocative modern artists, seems to have escaped the bonfires and their censorship. In 1943 in Vienna, the Nazis even sponsored the largest ever retrospective of Klimt's art. It is something rarely mentioned in Klimt post-war scholarship, but worth looking at. There is a Teutonic quality to Klimt's work that would have appealed to the Nazi aesthetic, but so much of his work and life did not fit in with their ideology. So what is it about Klimt's paintings that appealed to the Nazis? Rebranding helped. For the 1943 show, a Nazi art historian wrote an essay that downplayed the role of Klimt as a modernist and pushed the idea that the artist was part of the Austrian folk tradition and followed German philosophical roots in much the same way other Nazi-approved artists did. Klimt's paintings were deeply indebted to German philosophers like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. It is why the university rejected them. The Nazi aesthetic is familiar, but difficult to define, and sometimes contradictory. There was a leaning towards the classicism of ancient Greece and Rome. Klimt's own fascination for Greek mythology finds an easy counterpart in Nazi aesthetics. Like Klimt, the Nazis used the naked human form, but for very different reasons. Klimt was subversive, exploring taboos around sensuality and sex, whereas the Nazi nude was depicted as idealized and heroic, propaganda for their ideas on racial purity. Klimt, who died in 1918, had no say how his art would later be seen or adapted, any more than Nietzsche could control how the Nazis made very selective use of his philosophy. The Nazis saw both Klimt and Nietzsche as nationalistic, and the aforementioned 1943 essay implied that Klimt's scandalous painting of his young pregnant mistress should be viewed as a courageous woman producing babies for the Third Reich, and to see it otherwise was perverted. Any of Klimt's work that didn't fit the Nazi agenda was simply renamed. They erased the fact that Klimt's professional and private life was closely intertwined with the Jewish community of Vienna, and works like the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, under Nazi rule, was renamed A Lady with a Gold Background. In a strange twist of fate, the fact that the Nazis saw Klimt's work as noble ultimately became the reason for the university painting's destruction. As the Nazis faced setbacks in the spring of 1943, tens of thousands of works of art they had stolen were relocated to storage facilities hidden in castles, monasteries and mines, scattered across the Austrian countryside. 13 of Klimt's paintings were moved to a castle in southern Austria for safekeeping. But in the last days of the war, rather than let the art fall into Russian hands, a retreating SS unit set fire to the castle, destroying all the paintings, including Klimt's university works. Recently, large-scale black and white reproductions of the works were installed in the ceiling they were intended for, alongside the original centerpiece by Marc. A reunion of sorts, more than a century after they were created. Then after years of academic research on Klimt's use of colour, and with the help of AI, the university works were colorized. It was a project that united 33 partners and institutions from 12 countries, international IT specialists, art historians and Klimt experts. Now, over a century after they were created, we can at last imagine just how glorious those paintings were. Another masterpiece of Klimt's can be found at the Theatre Museum. Nuda Veritas, or Naked Truth, was created 2 years after he founded the Secession, around the time he was struggling with the University Commission. The somewhat aggressive inscription at the top of the painting makes it clear what he thinks about compromising one's art. If you cannot please everybody with your actions and your art, you should satisfy a few. To please many is dangerous. Klimt presents us with Nuda Veritas, literally the naked truth, and the figure is holding up a mirror, inviting us to examine ourselves. The realistic depiction of pubic hair and shameless sexuality was something no other painter had dared to do before, so it was hardly surprising that it caused a huge sensation when it was first presented in 1899. The text is from the 18th century poet and philosopher Friedrich Schiller, a symbol of Enlightenment thinking, who, like Klimt, was co-opted by the Nazis in their attempt to align German culture with their political ends. Goebbels called him the poet of the German Revolution, and even oversaw a propaganda film about him. The destruction and looting of art during the Nazi regime were part of a broader strategy to control and manipulate culture and to eliminate expressions of creativity and individualism. That most individual of artists, Gustav Klimt, was refashioned to align with Nazi ideology. And therefore, he not only escaped the Nazi purge, but strangely ended up as a cultural hero at the height of the regime. It is estimated that 650,000 works were looted from Europe by the Nazis, many of which were never recovered. We can only imagine how many more of Gustav Klimt's paintings would have disappeared if he too had been declared degenerate. Now for a quick advert from Miller Note. When I'm making these films, I have hundreds of images from researching the project and spend hours searching through them. It can be very time-consuming. I'm currently using Miller Note as a workspace to play with ideas and concepts. It allows you to collect notes, images, videos, to-do lists, and more in one place. This is really important for me. Not only writing my scripts, but also in making my films. I can be organized and keep all my captions, ideas, thoughts all in one place. They also have a built-in image library I've been using to get inspiration. It comes with over 100 built-in templates, as well as a web clipper that means I can save and download web images or videos straight onto the workspace, quickly and easily. It also has an iPhone app so I can access the project and add ideas and notes when I'm away from my desk. It really just helps me organize my information better so I can concentrate on creativity. For a free account, go to millernote.com/greatartexplained or click on the link below.